Ẹ jẹ́ ká bẹ̀rẹ̀.
Ẹni máa bẹ̀rẹ̀ ọ̀gbẹ́, ìṣàlùkọ́ ìṣàlùkọ́, ẹgbọ́n lẹ́sẹ̀ wọn, ẹni mẹ́ẹ̀dọ́, ẹni ẹwọ́ níjẹ̀, àdánwò sẹ̀rá David Osaodion Odiase 78 Psalms, ọ̀rẹ́sẹ̀ ìmẹ̀dá àpá ìmẹ̀dá tó ń bẹ̀rẹ̀, ìtẹ́kì gbọ́dọ̀ lè gbéra, máa mọ̀ ìyàwó òwò, tẹ́kì gbà wọn gbéra, máa jẹ́ òun ìwé dé sínú àgbéra, òun gbọ́dọ̀ ní wọ́n mú àgbéra, máa jẹ́ ìdókòó ṣìnà, láì jọ dé. Fokon buka sokon do da ba jọ mu kare bere ge am don ma le on na mu kana on dere ino mo tie wo ma de am de no on mo dere la jọ dere paro chono fa ma de do go chena wa mu jana ba fi ke ke boy ja yo ma mo Muhammad re ta wa no mo re ta wa mu jana wa ka lo ke na wa chlo chono fa wa re mi si jo wa egbedonda ọfure egbọmọ emesi alache chọmọ parada nọsọ bọnọdà ayé ìwárí bọnọdà lẹmídà lé ìwà wánú àmúdíà náà ìwà àgbà lọrọ nìjà wánú chọmọ kó àwọn májèkọ ẹmí àjọsẹwà.
Has hurt my mother. I did because I made her a mother. They say that the elder who names the newborn also names its suffering. In the beginning, she was everything. The clan trees and the sweetness of its black oranges. Iron war and its fatal cry. She was the throbbing of the earth's heart at the beating of Ngaji. She was the throwing of diviners' fetish bones. She was the song in the marrow of the artisan's chisel. She was ether and its etc. until I wanted her for worship and clothed her in flesh. Whatever vastness man cannot comprehend, he shrinks with a name. I am the elder who names the newborn and also names its suffering. My mother has been missing for many moons. Have you seen her? At the back of our house is a cult of diviners who agree that any absence that lingers for as long as it takes a corpse to stink should be ready for burial. But I do not blame them. There are centuries worth of backache from scratching and scratching and scratching the black ground. My God, even poems do not hide their metaphors that deep. And so I reckon that perhaps what the land has stolen, the river will return. At the bank, the boatman asks me for payments the width of my longings. I tell him that I come from a lineage of people who are interested in every reincarnation of themselves, and even our afterlife is not our own. And so plucking them out, I say, I have nothing but these eyes. I offer them to you, for there are no new kinds of violets. On the water, he dips his paddle into the depths, and we are guided into the fog until we are engulfed. Felgem, black as my forage forms under my throat, and I ask, whose lungs have you stretched into a sail? He answered, the sky. On the day she tasted fire, she poured out all of her gods. The river too is a country cured of memory, and perhaps this is why it rinses everything but itself. But I am searching for the door at the center of my want. I want to sink freedom into a knob and touch on my people's behalf, even though time will stay driven deep into the heart of this land. Even though the emptiness in my hands is a mourning for the matriarchs I will never hold, I still want to know. On the day the earth swerved sideways, what song oozed from the talk that drew my mother into another country's teeth? Ngomso! Ngomso! Mother of black treaties, I still want to know. What do I call it? And what language strangles the other in its diacritic? At the shore, a boy black and full of futures is waiting for us, where the land juts out its red tongue to drink. I kneel and I drink, but the water quenches every thirst in me except the drought in my own name. In my language, to die means or you. To be stolen also means or you. Because this mouth is not a barn we keep our dead. It is not a cenotaph for absence. Because in my mother's tongue, there are no horcruxes. Because in my mother's tongue, there are no horcruxes. In her tongue, there are no horcruxes! My mother's tongue, there are no horcruxes! No matter where you stand, there is always something dead beneath the ground. Everywhere is a tomb. Everywhere is a wound. I touch my continent on the map and I am red-handed. This land speaks. It says your fathers were murderers. But after the war, they went home to their wife and did not wash their hands. That you have inherited your father's stained fingers too. That your hands still reek of your father's crimes. But this body is 80% water. And under my skin is a drowning I cannot escape. This body is a gallows. And we have been hung at our own birthplaces. And my ancestors still come to me in dreams. They tell me that you have trapped their souls in your softwares and made digital zombies of your ethnosites. That you made up words like ethnography and universal mediums to consider your mindless acts of grave rubble. But turn out your pockets, you thieves. Bring it back. Come home. 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 Bring it back. Bring them back. Bring them back. Come home. Bring it 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 back. Come home. Bring them 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 back. 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 In the red flood we stood, at the mouth of Great Russell Street, before that house of tar and treachery, thinking of home, longing to build a lake house of our broken selves. And one among us walked towards the entrance and whispered, "Mbuya." And surely, the woman begins crawling away to the door.
In collaboration with the Getty Institute, we're going to have a little Q&A in about 5 minutes with David about his work and the relationship he has found with the quantum physics and Native African notions of spirituality, time, the roles, and all of that. So, thank you. We're going to have to wait a little bit.
Principles of quantum time, which is non-linear, and African notions of time, which is also non-linear. And I would admit it was a bit challenging because all I have was, well, my 4th day as a performer. So I had to basically invest so much time in finding metaphors that could convey both the artistic process and also the scientific backing as well. And so, for example, we have the memory board inside altar doing carving, and for me, it's inspired by a tribe in Africa that call themselves the Ukasa tribe. So the Ukasa tribe, they have the artifacts called the memory board. So what they do is the historian in the community, from touching the memory board, he's able to remember the history and tell to the village. So the memory board is also used to evoke ancestors. And one thing that I found very interesting about the memory board is the fact that it's very non-linear. So from the feeling of touching the attached objects on the memory board, the historian is able to remember and to recount the history of the tribe. And for me, I found that as a very logical way to represent African history and how notions of time, like past, present, and future, has been altered by historical events like colonialism, plunder of African artifacts from their homes in Africa to Western museums. And so you find me trying to tell a story about how I'm searching for my mother, how my mother is missing in this process, and how I represent my mother as the artifact. But also because when I think of the idea of culture, the concept of culture, I see culture as a matriarch. Like the fact that without our culture we are actually lost. So in a way I'm trying to connect the dots from the present and the future and seeing how I can, through these events, remember the future, remember what I want the future to be, where these objects are in their rightful place. Secondly, you have the circles, 3 circles. So you have this one, and this one. So I call them the spheres of existence. Also similar to notions of quantum principles, where we have time, the past, present, and future are existing at the same time. So we also have those beliefs also in African culture, where we have the world of the unborn, the world of the living, and the world of the ancestors. So here you have the altar, which is also one of the ancestors. So you find that in my performance, I'm trying to bring the artifact into the world of the ancestors, snatching them from the world of the living through the performer who represents my idea of colonialism. And you may also take note of stuff that I also use, like the colors and why there's contrast between them. So if I'm to go logically through the use of colors, definitely the idea of the black color represents black, like Africans, and the idea of the red also represents blood. So I swapped the logical sense because, like I said, I'm trying to remember the future, remember a time when all of these things, all of these stereotypes do not actually exist. So in a way, it's a performance where I try to occupy different worlds at the same time, and I also try to engage the performer in that space. I think lastly I will speak about the sound element. So in the beginning you heard my mother's voice, and there is a belief that a mother is like a deity. And because I want to engage the ancestors in the ancestral realm, I need another deity to speak on my behalf to the ancestors. So you find my mother, who represents the deity, speaking to her colleague, who is also the ancestors, and saying that they should grant me safe passage into the ancestral realm and make what I want to do very, very possible. So you hear her voice guiding me through the process. And then there's somewhere also in the sound elements where you have like voices like saying, bring it back, come back home. So during the process, I didn't want to work in a bubble. So I reached out to a couple of activists around Africa who work in trying to bring back African artifacts to Africa. Also similar to how I'm trying to bring the artifact into the ancestral realm. And so we had someone from Kenya, someone from Ghana, someone from Nigeria. We had like 5-6 languages at the same time trying to say, bring it back, come back home. Because in a way, if you observe during my performance, I was speaking to the ears of the artifacts. In a way, we consider these objects as having souls. So they can hear and they can interact with us as we engage them. So that was my way of also calling them into the ancestral realm and having all these voices from different parts of the world trying to also participate in the process of restitution. I think what else is left? Yes, the projections. So these projections are replicas of African artifacts that are currently like museums around the world. It's not the exact replica because I was trying to work with what was available in terms of copyright permission. and I was able to get, like some of the artifacts and try to make 3D models of them. And then you see that if you go to the artifacts, you can see like a heat replica of your silhouettes moving across the artifact. In a way, that is how I'm trying to represent spirituality. That is also how I'm trying to represent quantum memory as well, to show that this realm is actually a living and breathing realm. When we think of death, when we think of our ancestors, we often tend to think of them as they are in the past. But I'm trying to change the notion of saying they are our future, because they live in a realm beyond time. So these are things I try to mesh up together into my performance, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you very much.
So I have questions. What are the process of working around different, especially within the context of Mexico, of these symbols of the central flower, and we have this offering that now that you have explained it, without knowing, I thought that it was this way of death. Now that you have visualized it, I can understand more. But how was it to know that we have some friends? Very similar symbols, but yet so different.
Yes. So like I said, I didn't want to work in a bubble. So, and I understand that I am not in Africa, quote unquote. But as an artist, my job is also to find similarities within my environment that I can basically infuse into my performance. And so I learned about the Day of the Dead, and a very, very similar concept between our belief in Africa and people here in Mexico. For example, the idea of ancestors, the idea of animism, that objects have souls, and I was basically seeking to represent these concepts in my own way. And because I'm working with poetry, I have an understanding of how to use metaphors. For example, an object might have several meanings, and in the process of ideating, I figured I needed to have something that was really personal to Mexicans and something that they can also be able to connect with. For example, when you see the flowers, you can basically understand that I'm talking about people who are no more. So that was my process between working with all of these elements.
This color flowers, this color,
The flowers. So we don't have Zimbabwe in Africa. I wish we did, but we don't. And there's a culture of silence when it comes to ancestors in Africa. When we think of death, or when we think of our ancestors, the whole idea of westernization has really diffused how we are able to connect spiritually. So that is why you see I have these artifacts in digital format. I am trying to say that in order for us to connect with our spirituality, with our ancestors, the digital realm does not suffice in replicating the essence of spirituality. And that's also why I use the memory board. Because, for example, if it was like a digital memory board, for example, I would not be able to touch and feel it. So all of these things are what I envision. And I would also like to admit there was also the element of trying not to understand so much of what I was doing. Because for example, if I try to know everything about the process, if I try to rationalize everything, then there is no room for wonder. There is no room for discovery, and so I try to allow the project to guide me and give me its own meaning. Yeah.
So how do you define yourself religiously? Are you a Christian, an agnostic, a free soul? What about your parents? How were you brought up?
So that's a very interesting question. I'm Christian, but someone was saying something recently about how am I able to marry Christianity and African beliefs, and I said that very, very similar to Mexico as well. There have been indigenized versions of Christianity. For example, in my mother's church, we have something very similar to a ceremony of the dead. So it's called a missa. So it's a church and they worship God and they pray, but they have the belief called a missa. So in a missa, it is believed that when people die, they need a kind of ceremony to pass on to the other side. So we have a ceremony, we have people coming, we have food that they eat, we have prayers that we offer to them so that their spirits will be able to pass on into the afterlife. So all of these are indigenized versions of Christianity. There's also the notion of it's still a missa, but there is also something called Sarah. So Sarah is, for example, we feed our ancestors in a very spiritual way. So what we do is like we can cook, invite people, give food to beggars, or like along the road. In a way, we are also refreshing their soul on the other side, and we believe that doing that helps us to like open the road for good things happening to us in our life. So there is Christianity, but even in Nigeria is a very religious country. We have 100 different versions of Christianity in Nigeria. So yeah, that's how I'm able to marry something.
Can I follow up? So what about the as a Latin American or as a Mexican, I see a similarity in what you were saying, as you just said. Like even though we became independent countries and the first colonial period is sort of over, these remnants of the religion that came from Europe or from the Middle East, or wherever you want to come from, are still here. And I've always wondered, and I wonder if you wonder the same, how come it's not possible to go back to the pureness, so to speak, or to the original set of beliefs before the colonization and before Christianity? And do you think that the fact that they are so mingled or so interwoven, does it not confirm the theory of Christianity like being the true religion, or what our ancient peoples were really looking for, and finally this came with the Europeans or the people from overseas? I don't know if I'm making any sense.
So I share the questions, and while, for example, like what I did today, I'm trying to provide answers, but I'm also trying to ask questions. For example, there's a place in the poem where I said, I'm searching for the door at the center of my wants. Like I'm trying to unlock this door that seems beyond my reach, where everything that I want is behind that door, but I don't know how to find that door. So in a way, in my art, I'm also trying to ask questions, not because honestly I can't answer everything, but I'm also trying to see how it's possible. But then, so that's the idea of time. That's the idea of what I'm trying to represent. I'm saying that we can go back in time. There's a Ghanaian symbol. It's called Andrika language. I think if you look closely at the artifacts, there's like a backdrop of some symbols there. They are Andrika symbols. And there's one called Sakonfa. So Sakonfa is the picture of the bird looking back to take an egg from its tail. So it is like a symbol of, in order to go forward, you have to take lessons from the past. The only way to move forward is actually to look back. So symbols like this really help me to like question, like what exactly, how can we go back? But then if you look at the world is changing, like the world is evolving every single day. For example, you can't ask me to go back to, for example, the time when there was no cell phone, how would I survive? And I think there is a version of that in spirituality. You know, like the world evolves. But what we can do in our own way is to see how we can take the good from the old and merge it with the new. It's not a popular movement. Like James Baldwin said, God is not a popular movement. And I think so also these practices. It's not a popular movement. But if I decide that I want to live or abide by the ways of old, no one will come and arrest me. You know, so I believe that from the crop of people, little by little, we can actually create pockets of collectives around the world where we are able to remember the past and also try to see how we can use that to reshape the future.
Thank you.
How did you choose the artifacts to use in the videos? I imagine there's hundreds of artifacts around that we can use in the project. So why did you choose this particular?
So like I said, I was trying to work around copyright permissions. What I did was I tried to choose artifacts that look like the majority of other artifacts. So for example, one artifact could have like semblance to other artifacts. And obviously I cannot fill up the space with artifacts. So what I did was I chose 3 artifacts because I'm working with the number 3, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So I chose 3 artifacts that I felt represented what I was talking about. You can see that that's also like a figure. This is a scroll. So this scroll represents the holy tablets of Magdala. I couldn't get the actual. So Magdala was in Ethiopia at some point, and they had these holy scrolls. So that's why, for example, in Nigeria, when people ask me, why are you trying to, like Christians who are very Christian ask me, why is it that you're trying to talk about idols and all those things? And I'm like, the artifacts in the museums are not just idols. They are also religious artifacts in some of these texts. So that is also what I was trying to represent there. You can see the Anglican symbols here, that they have different meanings. So I basically, there was a bit of randomness. I also tried to represent the popular notion. For example, I'm from Benin and I'm Nigerian. We have what we call the Benin bronze that are in the museums. But I wanted to be much more broader. For example, you will find there's one that looks like a cowrie head figure. So in a way, that reminds me of the Benin bronze head. But then there is also this artifact, I think it's in the Humboldt Forum in Delhi. It's called Nganji. It's also created with cowries. So I basically looked for things that were like morphed together that I could find elements of other artifacts in them.
I think these coincidences between these traditional spiritualities and modern quantum theory are very convincing in your work. How did you find these connections?
I would say the connection found me. So luckily, I had so part of my residency involved. We have 2 weekly sessions with like some experts, artists. So every week we have 2 meetings online with all these people around the world. And outside of that particular weekly sessions, I also had to speak with other artists as well. I did like tons of research. I read like books. Go to studio, like you see like my text is just for books. And yeah, so it it was very, very interesting to see how to merge them. But then there is a collective in the US. They call themselves the Black Panther movement, and they also just like I'm trying to do. They were able to also connect quantum notions, also African notions of time. So it was very, very easy for me to look into their work, their practice, rationalize what they also did. And also, like I said, like the practice is poetry, so I'm very, very adept to use of metaphors, things that have double meanings. So I just found a way of, but it wasn't easy actually. It wasn't easy to be like, all weeks put together, the whole structure, think about it. But before those 4 weeks, I came here from Germany, and I spent like a month before like going to museums, understanding first the artifact and performance history. Then here in Mexico, I was having like sessions with like quantum physicists. There's an artist called Amy Carl. So Amy Carl is very, very adept in visual arts. And she was like, I want to just use what you have and just see how you represent it. So it was, yeah, so that was how I was able to like come up with these ideas. There are some things, I would say that we can't solve everything with technology. And I will say this because there's one of the artifacts is like a stone, like a gravestone. And it reminds me of the Rosetta Stone taken from ancient Egypt. And it also reminded me of the human remains. So currently, last year in the British Museum, there was like theft of some artifacts. And they wanted to digitize most of their collections, but they could not digitize the human remains because it was obviously you can't actually do that. And it really got me thinking about the fact that no matter all the things that you can do with technology, there are still those things that you cannot still do. I cannot connect with my ancestors. I cannot connect with my ancestors through a digital photograph. There has to be presence, there has to be a link. That's why you also have the memory board as well. So I am seeing technology as maybe to visually represent what it feels like. Like I can visually represent the shortcomings of technology, using technology, right? But then there is also the ability to dream. For example, I really could not, unless I was a very powerful magician, I really could not conjure up the essence of spirituality without using digitalization and 3D models. So yes, there is a marriage, but there also has to be the understanding that they have to always find a middle ground. Because there is also the question of ethics as well. For example, if I write my name on like in Microsoft Word, for example, you find like a red line under it. That means that even the language or technology was not specifically made for Africans. There is this underlying stuff, and so it's just trying to find a middle ground and not trying to say that you can't solve all problems with technology, obviously. So there has to be like where they both meet, where they both connect, and where they both help to amplify one another.
I think, like, my questions were in regards to like the links that you had found once you were in Mexico, and I think that there's like pretty similar, not only in the notion of ancestry, but also the stolen artifacts from museums. I think that's something that, of course, we see here. Kind of it's like, in order for the communities to reach these artifacts, they need to pass through institutions and like notions of history that was made without like understanding or truly involving them.
Went to the anthropological museum like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, how was your experience?
I would say it was all Spanish and not English. So I really didn't really understand. But it was, so this is what I think. Because as an African, I have a different idea of origin of man. They would have different beliefs about it. So it was kind of opposite to what I believe. But I just enjoy the science behind it. Trying to connect the whole like Homo sapiens, Homo habilis, sobre. So it was very, very interesting to see. But it was very counter. Should I say counter African? Yeah, that was my experience, yes.
Just following up on that, why do you mean very counter-African? How so? What do you mean?
So, it's going to be a long story, but let me start by shortening it. So, because the notion of anthropology, for example, is very statistical. Like there's like you have to find like an evidence, you have to do like archaeology, you have to find like this, connect the dots. But for us as Africans, it's more spiritual. Let me use that word. For example, there's the Yoruba tribe, for example, believes that the origin of man started from somewhere called Ile-Ife. So Ile-Ife is a place in Nigeria, for example, and there is a god who came from the sky with a cock and a rope and came like on the waters, and he also came with a god of sand. So with the sand he sprinkled on the floor and the cock scattered the sand around the earth. So then till date people still worship that deity. So then science does not speak in the language of spirituality. Science does not support ontologies. Science is more about proof. Science is more about what I can see and touch and what I can calculate, for example. But one of the things that I really enjoy about African beliefs is like it gives room to dream. You know, for example, we have Thor, like in Marvel films, Thor is the god of thunder. In Yoruba mythology, we have same thing, god of thunder. And he was a man who lived among us. You know, we have all these sides of culture. For example, like we did a project recently, and we went to like a river community, and the river was considered important. People still worship the river. But science will just come and says H2O, hydrogen and oxygen, you know, like so there's an absence of representation of things that are beyond our understanding. Science is always about literal, you know. So that was why I found it. It's interesting to study. It is actually it's interesting. I'm also a scientist in my own way. But I love the ability to dream. I don't want to think about how I came and think, oh, like this, like an ape and came. There is no imagination in that somehow, sorry to say. You know, I want to imagine my existence as a much more ephemeral experience. How I came to this world, how I got to this world, you know. And that's also why I find, for example, in my poems, I try to really represent the concepts through voyage and traveling. Like in the poem, I was talking about how I was on the boat and looking for my mother. The boat itself represents time. The fog itself represents the cloud around the concept of spirituality. So like all of these elements in the poems have representations and how I'm able to connect with the core of myself as an African. And science doesn't offer me a lot of leg room to explore.